I give her a lot of credit because the shift went from why am I not getting this to what can I do to get this for myself, right? And I think that she stepped outside of her comfort zone. She started to talk to more people. She started to volunteer for things. She started to ask for things, right? And then I think by the time she approached her boss, she had already been doing the work for a good month or two. And so really it was just proving to him that I'm not asking for something that I'm not already doing. Our expectations of what being a manager is and the reality of the day-to-day is far off. 75% of people leave jobs because of a poor relationship with their manager. That's huge, right? Whereas only 12% leave because of salary issues. So we think that money is the main motivator. But in a lot of instances, even though if someone's going to offer you a ton of money, yeah, you're probably going to get up and go. Career development comes up as high, if not higher than salary. And to me, the definition of career development is you want to be mentored by your manager.
Welcome to the Speak Your Mind Unapologetically podcast, the place to be to upgrade your strategies, tactics, and confidence to have breakthrough conversations and speak up effectively and unapologetically in your career and life. Why? So that you can get ahead faster, but also have more impact, be a better leader, be taken seriously, and be respected as yourself. This show is produced by the Assertive Way Enterprise. We are on a mission to bring respect, both mutual respect and self-respect, into every interaction through the democratization of assertive communication skills. And I'll be your host, Eva Curry. I'm the CEO and founder of AssertiveWay.com, INSEAD MBA, and a Forbes contributor. We can guide you in three main areas. First, assertive communication skills, and that includes feedback, disagreement, boundaries, and decisiveness. Second, breakthrough communication skills for women and minorities. And lastly, respect skills for a more connected, inclusive, and diverse world. If you want to explore our offerings, we provide workshops, consulting, coaching, and trainings both virtually and in person. So check the link in the description below for more resources and to learn more about how we can work with you and your team. And now, let's get started. Hey, Scott, so great to have you here in the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about the X factor with managers and how to make managers great. And this is a very important topic because a lot of people are in that position right now in the management role. And I think the manager role has just gotten more difficult now with COVID and the pandemic. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that as well. But first of all, let me introduce you to the audience. So Scott, and let me see if I'm pronouncing your name right. Is that Asai?
Yeah.
Scott Asai is a professional speaker specializing in teaching soft skills. And you guys know how much I love soft skills. He focuses on improving communication, leadership, and emotional intelligence. His brief, conversational, and practical style makes it easy for audiences to implement new strategies. And he has experience he has a BA in psychology and MA in organizational leadership, and he's a certified professional coach, certified strengths coach, Clifton strengths, and a TEDx speaker. So make sure I'll link here below his TED conversation, his TED presentation, so that you guys can watch it. What's the name of it, Scott?
Saving soft skills from extinction.
Look at that. That's perfect. And in his free time, Scott enjoys spending time with his wife and his two kids, working out and playing. So today we're going to talk about managers. And one thing that you say a lot, Scott, is that managers are the X factor, and specifically in tech companies, because you work a lot with tech companies. Could you elaborate a little bit more about what that means?
Yeah, sure. So I think a lot of times in companies, and maybe we're focusing on tech companies because that's really what I work with, is that we tend to push the blame towards the top or the bottom. It's, oh, it's the owners, it's the CEO, it's the people who keep on leaving, it's their fault, right? But really, where not a lot of attention goes is in the middle to the managers. And I believe that people leave companies really because of the managers that they have, and they have a poor relationship with them. And so when we talk about the tech industry, they have a 20% turnover rate, which is about the highest of any industry. And the problem with that is that there's actually more jobs than there are people. So you have a lot of talented people on the front line who are leaving to your competition. But the only thing that's really going to keep them there is if they have a good relationship with their manager. And so what I try to do in my work is really work with onboarding and training managers, preferably newer ones. They're a little bit more moldable in terms of giving them soft skills and equipping them, because they really can be retention tools for the company. And quite honestly, a lot of times, if they do a really good job, then they become somewhat of a referral source for new employees because their people love them so much. So that's really what I mean by the managers being an X factor. I feel like if companies spent more time hiring and developing managers, it would benefit their company in the long run and really affect their bottom line positively.
Yeah, it's interesting. Today I was reflecting on something that is related to what you just said. And that is the fact that my best managers were the ones where kind of we chose each other. So I came in externally, they hired me, and I hired them because we went through the interview. But often you, as an employee, you come into a company or a role because of a manager. You guys get along, they want you. But then that manager soon after leaves, and you inherit a new manager and they inherit you, and you don't get along that well because you just have different philosophies, and you're no longer the favorite. You're no longer the person that the manager really likes. They just have to deal with you, even though they're not you make it work, but it's not that ideal situation. And oftentimes it's not ideal because the communication, the soft skills are not there to make it work, to make it really effective. So I'd love to hear from you, what, in your experience, and especially in the tech company that you work with the most, what are the skills that you find that are missing the most, that would make the biggest difference for entry-level managers?
Yeah, well, so I would say that there's, arguably a list of probably 10 to 20 soft skills that are out there, depending on where you're going to research those things. But I would say the ones that stand out to me the most tend to be communication, leadership, and emotional intelligence. And I would say really the foundation for soft skills in general tends to be communication. So I think a lot of times what happens is that when someone gets promoted, especially internally, which is about probably 80% of the time, they get promoted for the right reasons, in the sense that they are a high performer. They've done a good job, right? But making the transition into a managerial role, your job is not to be the best anymore. Your job is to bring out the best in their people. And that is a completely different skill set. The focus is not on you anymore. It's actually on the people that you're leading. And so therefore you become somewhat of a resource. You become someone who can help work out problems. Maybe you're a listening ear. And a lot of times I think people who have achieved well, they kind of do a lot of individual work. And now as a leader, your job is really to be a team player, and really someone who sort of champions the performance of other people. And I think, unfortunately, what happens is that when we are hired at a company as a new employee, we get this orientation, we get a training, usually for about a couple of weeks, and it's great. And it helps us sort of get acclimated to the company, to the role, to the culture. But when a new manager gets promoted within a company, they usually do not get that type of training. And so it's almost as if what got them there is not going to serve them. And so I see sort of gaps in communication, leadership issues in terms of like how people are being talked to and what is expected of them, right? And emotional intelligence, I think, is just being able to be professional and be able to self-regulate with emotions, because, hey, a lot of a manager's job, I've heard the statistics, 50% of a manager's job is dealing with interpersonal conflict. And so if you don't like dealing with people's problems, then in a way, maybe being a manager is just not a good fit for you.
So that's interesting because I've heard from a lot of people who are in tech or in very also very high intellectual kind of positions, but haven't yet moved by choice into management. It's because, and I'm going to use their words, because they don't want to babysit people. They don't want their job to be babysitting people. And I found it interesting, and I heard this from multiple people. How do you see it? Because it must be a shock for people who are really used to, really good at, their coding or their programming or their project work, their individual work, and suddenly now their focus completely changes. How can an individual who moves into management for the first time enjoy the process and really lean into that new role and not feel like their job is now to babysit people?
Well,
like you said, resolve conflicts.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. And I think that in most leadership roles, whether you're a manager, you're doing it voluntarily, at a club or maybe a social group, it takes a lot of ego out of it. It can't be about you anymore. I think the decisions that you make are going to have an impact on other people. Whereas maybe if you're an individual contributor, you're just worried about yourself. And so I think, with all soft skills, and those three in particular, the only way to get better at them is really to practice them. And so a lot of times, a lot of the information that we get tends to be head knowledge. And that's good because you need to have that first. But soft skills to me are very kinesthetic, are very hands-on, and you actually have to practice them. So as an example, I do public speaking for a living now, but 10 years ago, it was something that scared me to death. And the only way I got over it was really to change my mindset first. But really after that, what really helped me make progress was to volunteer speaking, to record myself, watch the recordings, start to watch other people who talked and things like that. And over time, I got better. It didn't happen overnight. But with soft skills, I like to compare them to like muscles in your body. Your muscles can atrophy if you don't use them, but they only get stronger if you develop them. And so if you do not practice soft skills and give yourself opportunities in real situations, whether they be personal life or professional life, it doesn't really matter because they really are transferable to any situation. You're not going to get better at them just about reading about them, hearing about them, watching videos about them. You just have to get out there and practice them. And if you don't do that, then quite honestly, you're never going to get really better at soft skills.
You're right. I think we need to practice soft skills. Like you said, it's like developing a muscle in our body. It is about practice, but it's also about, like, you even said, just understanding what your role is and being aware of that and seeking that out and having the right intentionality around it. And you shared in our previous conversations a story about someone who was moving into management role as well, or maybe you have another story and didn't have those soft skills. How did they go about developing these skills, and what helped them? Like, what are the things that a professional can do if they're moving into management for the first time to accelerate that learning curve?
Yeah, so I do remember the story. There was a client of mine, her name was Renee, and we worked together for about 4 to 5 months. And initially when we got introduced, I was coaching her. She didn't want to do it. And I think the first couple of sessions was me just trying to convince her to let her know that I was on our team. She wasn't in trouble. This wasn't punishment, but it was actually the company's way of giving her an external resource. And so as I earned the trust over time and, earned her favor over time, we were able to talk about what was in front of her. And what she really wanted to do is she wanted to become a manager in her department. And so part of my challenge was just to tell her that you need to actually do the job before you ask for the job, or better yet, ask for the raise, right? So that when you approach your boss and you're asking for that consideration, that they can look back and say, oh, well, she's already been doing it, And it was a long process, and it was sort of drawn out to a degree. But eventually, as we fast forward towards the end, a couple of weeks before we stopped working together, we actually role played. We role played the conversation. We role played potential conflicts. We role played how to go about things, And I think her I give her a lot of credit because the shift went from why am I not getting this to what can I do to get this for myself, right? And I think that she stepped outside of her comfort zone. She started to talk to more people. She started to volunteer for things. She started to ask for things, right? And then I think by the time she approached her boss, she had already been doing the work for a good month or two. And so really it was just proving to him that I'm not asking for something that I'm not already doing already. And it had a happy ending because the week after we stopped working together, she actually ran into my office and said, "Hey, guess what, Scott, I got the promotion," you know? And then I had a fresh batch of clients who were coming in. And instead of me giving the introduction about what coaching is, I was able to actually just have her do it. And it had such an impact on the new batch of clients because they were hearing it from her and her experience versus mine. And so, to sort of recap, it really was her stepping outside of her comfort zone and doing things as a potential leader that she wasn't used to or didn't quite honestly want to do before that really landed her in the position because eventually she proved to her boss that she was capable of doing the job.
And why is it that she did not want to take that job initially or do those things to get that promotion?
I mean, I think, like anyone, she wanted the promotion in terms of the salary upgrade. But I think once she realized that her job duties were going to change a lot and that she was a pretty strong contributor and now her job was going to be, sort of being the manager of her peers. And I think that's always a little bit of a weird transition too. Like if you're an internal candidate, now all of a sudden your coworkers, now you're their boss, right? And it's sort of this weird transition. And I think there was a little bit of that. But then also, too, she happened to be a little more on the shy side, maybe a little bit more introverted. And fortunately, that is actually my natural tendency, too. So I actually was able to relate to her and share with her what really worked for me. And so I think she felt a little bit more assured. But yeah, I think ultimately, once she understood what the job was going to take and that even some areas that she didn't necessarily feel that strong in, but in order to get that job, she's going to have to step into those roles. Then I think eventually she really bought into it and she decided to do the work.
Yeah, and the mindset that you coached her in, which is to move away from why don't I get the promotion to what do I need to do to get the promotion, I think it's fantastic. But also, I don't know what your experience is when you coach people in the process of moving towards manager position. For sure, doing the work and taking on that role before you actually formally take the role and get the promotion is super important. But at times, and I can tell you this even from my own experience as a manager of people, I didn't always have the power to promote my people. And I didn't have the budget, I didn't have the positions. Even if they asked, even if I thought they deserved it, I could not promote them. And oftentimes, I also noticed that what we think, let's say if I'm looking for a promotion, what we think is going to be value add to our manager, to our company, that they're going to see as leadership material might be different from what they see. So there might be it might be a difference there, a gap between what we think we need to do versus what they think we should be doing in order to be seen in that way. And so based on those two things, do you have any feedback for people that are kind of going through that right now?
Just to kind of clarify your question, are you talking a little bit more about like the disconnect between?
So someone who's trying to make it to manager and their individual contributor, how do they go about it if they're not applying for a specific position that's available in their team, but they still want the promotion? And at the same time, you mentioned it's important to think about, okay, what do I need to do in order to get the promotion? But how do they go about making sure that they don't do things and invest time and energy on doing things that are not exactly what they need or their company wants them to do to be seen as that leader, as that manager, and move into the next position?
Yeah, well, one of the reasons why I love working with managers in general is that a lot of times people have this natural curiosity of what it would be like to be a leader. And they have this fantasy about what the job's going to look like. And I try to tell people that if you understood the responsibilities of a manager, sometimes you actually just wouldn't aspire to be one. And that's okay. I think a lot of times the natural default is if I do a good job, I'm going to be promoted to a manager. And for the most part, that tends to be true. But it's a completely different role. It's a completely different skill set. So I think, if you're smart, you may ask your manager, hey, what do you do on a daily basis? You may do informational interviews with other managers at different companies, get a feel for what the job entails, right? The same way that if you were to apply to a job at a company that you weren't employed with at the time, you would do your homework, right? You would do informational interviews, you would ask around, you would read job descriptions, potentially talk to recruiters, what it's like. I think that people tend not to do that when they are aspiring managers. And I think if they did that, they would have a better idea of what to expect. I think a lot of times our expectations of what being a manager is and the reality of the day-to-day is far off. And the more you can align your expectations with what the job actually entails, I think you're actually setting yourself up for success. And essentially, I try to share with people that I think a lot of managers who are successful, who I would put in that great category, are the ones who like to connect with people, have strong relationships, don't mind talking about personal things if it means that it's going to unlock their potential in terms of their performance. And really, I would say ultimately the shift goes from me to we. And I think that's a difficult transition to make because people are so focused on doing a good job that they don't realize that a lot of times as a manager, you give the praise to people when they don't honestly deserve it all the time. Maybe you did the brunt of the work. And you also have to take the blame for someone else's mistake, even if it's not your fault. And, it's really essentially a very thankless job. But I think the people who do well at it, they find a lot of joy in developing people and helping grow people. And if that is something that internally, fires you up, then I think it's probably a good fit whether you have experience at it or not.
Yeah, and I like what you said. It's a job that is very different from what we imagine it to be once we get there. And I think that research is very valid and liking people and relationships. But as you were speaking, I remembered my first experience as a people manager, going from individual contributor to manager. And initially I got a team of 4 people who were all older than me. And within 6 months that grew to about 13. And what happened was I wanted so badly to serve those people and to be a good manager. But at the same time, I was failing, and I was feeling so bad because even at the beginning, that team that I got, they had gone through like 3 different managers in the last 12 months. So they were already very skeptical and angry when I joined. And because I wasn't very strong in my direction setting for the team, so I was listening, I was doing the one-on-one conversations, trying to understand what they felt, what they needed to succeed, and making all these promises, they hated it. And they hated it so much that they made an intervention. One day I got to work and they stopped me on the corridor on the way in. They said, Ivna, and by then there was maybe like 6 of them or 7, Ivna, this is an intervention. This is not working for us. We need to change. And they went on and on about all the problems, and they had already talked to my boss that they were going to do this intervention. And so it's funny because sometimes you want something so bad and you want to serve your team and you have that aspiration, and yet you fail miserably in the process. And luckily I had a great boss who was very supportive and mentored me through this first experience. I know everybody doesn't have such a traumatic experience, but I did have a lot of, trying to be really nice and caring, but getting a lot of insubordination, folks saying, nope, I'm not going to do what you're telling me to do. A lot of crying, a lot of yelling, a lot of screaming. And you're just not ready for that the first time you take on that role. And it is a challenge. Like you said, 50% of the time you're leading with conflict, but you're also trying to make sure that you manage things along and move and make sure that the team is productive. Because at the end of the day, that's what your boss wants to hear, that there's no confusion and that your team is productive. So yeah, you're right. There's a disconnect there. And what do you think that are the skill sets that would differentiate a manager from another manager that would make them great
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously probably a long list, and I think the nice thing about being a good leader, being a good manager, is that there is not a prototype. But if I had to list a couple that pop sort of pop in my mind are, I think a lot of great managers are very empathetic, and empathy is different than sympathy. So empathy doesn't mean that you agree with them, but it means that you'll listen to them. You'll try to put yourself in their shoes, and you'll hear them out before you judge them, and you will let them talk before you potentially discipline them, right? I also think that when you ask people the question like, who's your favorite leader, and then they list them, and then you ask them why, a lot of times, if not all of the time, the attributes that they list tend to be characteristics. A lot of them tend to be soft skills. You don't hear from someone, oh, I loved my boss at this company because he was always on time, or he was just really good at his job, like he was a really good coder or something like that, right? No, you hear things like, oh, he cared about me. He listened to me. I felt like he had my back. He was loyal. He was supportive. Those types of things, right? And so I think that the better leaders out there are the ones who have a genuine care for the people that they lead, and they are more invested in that person's development, whether they stay or leave, to the point where the loyalty nowadays to a company is not to an organization, it's to a manager. And so when people get up and leave, 75% of people leave jobs because of a poor relationship with their manager. That's huge, right? Whereas only 12% leave because of salary issues. So we think that money is the main motivator. But in a lot of instances, even though if someone's going to offer you a ton of money, yeah, you're probably going to get up and go. Career development comes up as high, if not higher, than salary. And to me, the definition of career development is you want to be mentored by your manager. Now, granted, if you have 100 people on your team as a manager, you cannot mentor everybody, but it starts there. And I think the better managers are the ones who understand that their job is really to be sort of the MVP to make everybody else better. And that means being very innovative and being very creative in terms of how to go about that, and understand that what motivates one person may not motivate someone else. So a lot of your work is going to be, strategy and motivation tactics, knowing when to say something, knowing when not to say something. And it's really, I like to say that leadership is as much of an art as it is a skill. And it's only something you really understand once you start doing it. And so if you don't have that experience, I always tell people that positional leadership is probably the weakest form. If someone has to call you the boss or manager just because they have that title, you probably don't have the respect of that person. Whereas when you're volunteering with a friend group, or when you were a kid and you're playing on the playground, or you're the president of a club or something like that, you actually have to earn that respect. And when you do that, then you really earn the way to say the tough things to people. Because as managers, you have to say tough things. But if you establish that relationship, that becomes the foundation, then I really, truly believe the people who are on the receiving end of that, even if it's harsh, they feel like, well, he's saying it from a genuine place of care, so I'm going to listen to him, even if I don't agree, because in the past, he's shown me that he actually cares about my best interest. And if it means that I need to hear some harsh stuff, then I'd rather hear from him than somebody else.
Yeah, and as you talked about what people say when you ask them what was your favorite manager like, and you said most of the time it's soft skills. I'm going to answer that question as well. So my favorite manager was one who, again, his soft skills were incredible, and he made me feel as if he's the one who got me into my first manager role, like leading a team. And I came in, he hired me as a manager directly, even though I didn't have that experience. And what I think he did was so exceptionally that just made him so much better than any other man. And I had great managers, but so much better than any other manager I ever had. Is that, again, this varies by person, but I think he knew that this was something that worked for me. He pushed me to my very edge every single day. I've never felt so pushed and so challenged in any job ever in my life as in that one job, because every day I was I was literally anxious and stressed, but in a good way. It was more of excitement and fear and all of those things, but all mixed up in a way that didn't really matter, because at the end of the day, I knew that I was going to mess up, but I also knew that he was going to back me, and he, like you said, back me up. He was going to support me. And whenever people yelled at me, whenever people said, no, I'm not going to collaborate with you, whenever people said, we're not doing this, we're not, this is not right, or they said, I don't want to listen to you because you're too young, you're this young female, he would be there to support me. Whenever I made a mistake, he would be there to not only directly interfere with the situation and resolve the conflict, but he would actually coach me in resolving the conflict for myself. He would coach me on how to let my team members go, because some of them, frankly, were not meant to be there. He coached me on how to hire. He coached me on how to deal with angry people. And people, for me, I was a young female in analytics and supply chain management, had to deal with a lot of older men. And he taught me how to deal with them so that they wouldn't walk all over me. And so for me, it was very powerful. And that's what represented, the manager that completely transformed my life. And I think if you can be that manager to someone else, someone that you can transform them. And I don't know if you've ever had an experience like that with like a manager of yours that really left a mark. But I know that in that same job, even though everybody, my team members were not interested, they were rebelling against me. By the time I left, within a year and a half, one of my employees later sent me a message saying, Ivna, thank you so much. You were my role model. And today I base my leadership style on you and what you did for us. And it's so rewarding when you have like you said, when you're a manager and you're able to focus on the people and you realize that you made a change, you literally changed their life. Like this guy changed mine in my own perception of how to manage people and challenge me as a person. And when you can do that for other people, it's just not the same as it provides so much more sense of fulfillment versus individual work, I find. I don't know, who was your favorite boss of all times and why?
Yeah, for me, I think I've gotten the question a lot, like, what do you want from me as your manager, your boss, right? And my answer has always been autonomy. And I think sometimes people take it different ways, but I try to be a very, very much a straight shooter. So I just let them know, like, hey, you tell me what I need to do objective wise, and I'll do those things. If I don't do those things, then you can hold me accountable for them. But what I don't want is I don't want you looking over my shoulder asking me how I'm doing everything, because I'm going to get the job done. And if I don't get the job done, then that's your job to get all over me. But if you're going to micromanage me in terms of how I get there, then we're going to have issues. So I would say, my favorite boss was at my first full-time job. His name was Keith, and he wasn't necessarily the strongest presence of a leader, but he was very supportive. And he knew my style. We had actually known each other years before, so it was actually good. And, he would take me out to lunch once a week. We would sort of talk about what's going on, and he would ask my opinion about things. I think a couple instances that really stood out to me, or one instance that really stood out to me, was I was actually preparing for an event that we had later on in the week, and I had to do a lot of like manual labor. I had to do a lot of like changing light bulbs and moving things, and just a lot of like physical labor, right? And he came in on his day off, and I was like, oh, what are you doing here? I was like, today's your day off. And he's like, oh, I just came to help. And he didn't say much. He just helped me with stuff. And I was like, man, I really appreciated that. I told him afterwards, and he said nothing. He said some things to me, but we were like working in different rooms, and he just sort of went after things. And to me, that spoke volumes. He didn't have to give a speech. He didn't have to like try to fire me up or whatever like that. I was pretty self-motivated. But I think for me, that style worked really well. Now, other people would say like, well, he's not that great of a speaker, and he's not that strong of a leader, sort of thing. And I'm like, yeah, I get that. But I think, part of it is knowing yourself and knowing what you need. And I think great leaders are really self-aware, I believe. So that means that they know what their strengths and weaknesses are. And because I knew what mine were, I could be very clear about this is what I need, this is what I don't need. And he respected that. And I think that we maintain a relationship till today, and it's been a long time. But I always look back to him as sort of that person who was at least my favorite manager, because he really, it sounds kind of funny, but he allowed me to be me. And I think at the end of the day, that's what I really wanted.
He allowed you to be you, and he was supportive of you being you, and he led by example, right? Because he came in as well when you had work to do in the weekend, but he came in to be supportive, to show, hey, I'm here as well. Yeah. I'm not just sending you out here to do all this work.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Is there before we close off, is there anything else that you would like the audience to leave with today?
Well, I know we've been talking a lot about leadership, and I'll just be very brief with this advice, but when you ask yourself, how can I become a better leader, or how can I manage my people better, I always like to think of the idea of, be the leader that you want to follow, right? Like, I think a lot of times we think of, what attributes do I want to, and what do I think makes a strong leader, and so on and so forth. But we have an image of what we believe is like a great leader, right? And so why not just be that person? Instead of waiting for that person to show up or complaining about your current situation, like, why don't you step into that role? And I think if you do that, you'll understand what the gaps that you have that are missing. And I think as a leader, as long as you're hungry to learn, and you always put yourself in situations where you're going to be a little bit uncomfortable and it's going to be a bit of a stretch, then you're going to learn. And therefore, while you're in that process, I think you actually take people along with you, rather than, criticize people for doing this or not doing that type of thing. I think that's easy. It's easy to blame, but as a leader, as a manager, it's your job to be the catalyst for your own growth. And when you do that, then, to be honest, I just think great things happen.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that. I personally do not know of any true leader out there who is passive. And I say passive in the sense of they sit back and wait for things to happen for them. They sit back and wait for somebody to resolve their problems. They sit back and just hope somebody's going to notice their team's work or what they need to bring to their team to make them successful, and just wait and hopes, and puts it in the hand of somebody else to resolve their issues, their conflicts, their needs, and their team's needs, and their team's issues, and their team. So, yeah, like you said, a leader needs to take action. Just go ahead and have those conversations, even if it's uncomfortable. And especially if it's uncomfortable, I would say, because that means there's something that needs to be resolved over there. And it's your role. That's your job. Definitely. To resolve for yourself and resolve for your team. So I love that. Yeah, that's wonderful. So where can folks find you, Scott, and your work, and even book a talk with you or get you to speak at their company about soft skills for managers?
Yes, I would say that I'm really active on LinkedIn. So if you just look up my name, Scott Asai, on LinkedIn, if you send me a connection request, I'll get back to you. If you message me, I'll respond to you. My site is just my name, so scottasai.com. It has a little bit of information about the programs that I offer there. But I would say those two are probably the best places to reach me. And I take pride in following up and responding to people. So I think if you reach out, you're not going to have to worry about whether you're going to get a response from me or not.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming by and sharing your wisdom around soft skills. And we'll talk soon.
You're welcome. It was fun.
Scott Asai shared some really great insights as to being a first-time manager and the importance of soft skills. He talked about the fact that some of the top skills that make a lot of difference for first-time managers are communication, which he says is the foundation of skills for managers, leadership, but also emotional intelligence. He also said that, and I thought this was a great analogy, that generally when people join a new company, there's an orientation session to help them figure their path in towards that new company, the new culture, the new things that they need to be focused on. But when a new manager gets promoted, there's no orientation, there's no such thing. He also talked about the fact that half of a manager's job is dealing with interpersonal conflict, and therefore you need to learn how to deal with interpersonal conflict. I also thought it was interesting the story he shared about this lady who shifted her approach from, why am I not getting this? Why am I not getting this promotion? Why am I not getting this opportunity? To what can I do to get this opportunity? What can I do to get this promotion? What can I do to get this raise? And then just by shifting that question, she started to do more, ask more, volunteer more. I also loved how he explained that the way to remove the disconnect between what people expect as individual contributors of what being a manager is going to look like and what it actually is by looking what your manager is doing. Do informational interviews with managers in other companies, talk to recruiters, read job descriptions, and that way you'll have a better understanding and be more prepared when it actually happens so that you're not doing the wrong things or focusing on the wrong things. He also talked about great managers being empathetic, but not sympathetic and not agreeing. And a question that he posed, was, who is your favorite leader and why? And that generally when people respond, who is their favorite manager of all times? Usually it's someone that had great soft skills, that made them feel heard and respected and cared for and were supportive and had their back. And I totally related to that, and I shared my own story of my favorite leader and manager as well. He also mentioned that loyalty is not to an organization, it's to their leader, and that 75% of people leave their managers. I heard something around 80% of people leave their companies or their positions when they quit because of lack of appreciation, which I think is similar, not salary, right? It's a minority of people who leave because of salary. And he also talked about the fact that his favorite manager was someone that respected what he needed and what he didn't like and what he liked, and essentially allowed him to be himself. He said, my manager allowed me to be me. And I thought that was powerful. And so having said that, I want you guys to consider, if you are a leader or if you are someone who aspires to become a leader or to manage a group of people, what can you do right now? If you're maybe aspiring to do so, think about what can you do to get to that next level? And how can you figure out what that manager role is actually going to look like? If you are already a manager or leader, think about how you can make your team feel more understood, more appreciated, and still make sure that they're productive and get the work done. And what other skills can you do? How can you improve your communication skills so you can handle conflict when it happens? How can you improve your soft skills? These are all very important questions to stop and think about if you're a manager and you want to be better at your role and be more effective in what you do and leave a mark in the people that you lead, but also in the company that you work for. That's it for today, my friends. Thank you so much for watching. And if you have an opportunity, please go to iTunes, Apple, and review the podcast. Review the podcast, leave a rating, indicate how many stars you think we deserve, and leave a comment. And that way, it's going to support other people to come and explore and learn about this podcast as well. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next one. It's been an absolute honor to serve you today, and remind you that you can check out the show notes for this episode on my blog at assertiveway.com/blog. And do you want to go deeper on how you can speak your mind with confidence at work, unapologetically? Then go watch one of my several free trainings at assertiveway.com/free. Because in those trainings, you're going to learn the skills that you need to speak up with confidence and without being rude. Like how to say no, how to express your ideas in meetings, how to express how you feel, how to ask for what you want, ask for that promotion that's due, deal with difficult people, difficult conversations, handle criticism, give thoughtful, constructive criticism to your team members or others, to self-promote without bragging, and much, much more. So these are the kind of skills that your parents, your teachers, your bosses may not have taught you, but that are going to make all the difference in the world in your career, in your relationships, and in your happiness. Trust me. So thank you once more, and go ahead and enjoy the day. Have a delightful, wonderful week.